Hey everybody, it's Michael Futterman, and if you are a manager of others or a manager of managers, you have the responsibility of providing development to your employees. It's just a fact of being a manager in an organization these days, and some people really struggle with this. So today's session is really going to be about some of the basics that you can apply to helping those conversations go as well as possible and helping the planning for that go as well as possible. So just to get started, when we think about development of employees, there are a couple different ways that we can look at it. We can look at it through the lens of, does the employee need to develop their skills, or what do they need to know, or do they need to develop their affect, which is how they're behaving? So I want to talk about that a little bit, and then we'll get into some of the steps that you can take, sort of a rubric or a framework that you can use to develop your employees in a more effective way. So let's look at skills first. These can be hard or soft skills, and they can be viewed as high or low execution, meaning that they're doing it well or they're not doing it well. Hard skills are things like, how many words can you type per minute? Can you effectively use macros in Excel? Are you able to use Microsoft Word? Can you trade? Those are hard skills. Soft skills can be things like, how well do you communicate? Do you have empathy for others? Do you have high or low EQ? Those are all things that can be trained. Um, Affect is a little bit different. Affect is how somebody feels about something and how they exhibit those feelings. So that can be their demeanor, their tone of voice, or their facial expressions. And these may or may not be relevant to the performance of the individual or to the organization or to the delivery of the culture of the organization. We're going to get into that in a little bit more detail in a little bit. But regardless of whether we're talking about affect or skill development, there are four steps that anybody can take to help develop the skills of your employees. And those are, what are you trying to impact? What are the expectations that you want to set for the employee? What kind of resources are going to be available to the employee? And then ultimately, how do we create accountability and long-term engagement and measurement? And that's really what the rest of this session is going to be about, those four steps. So the first step in creating employee development plans is really not involving the employee at all. It's really a reflection by the manager on what needs to happen. So what are you trying to achieve here? So some key questions that you have to ask yourself before you even start having the conversation with the employee is this a skill or is it an affect issue? If it's a skill issue, asking yourself, does the employee know how to do this thing? Are they already doing it, but they need to do it differently? Or is it an entirely new thing that they need to learn? That's important. If it's an affect issue, what are the specific behaviors that are in question? Is it a demeanor issue? Do they come in with just a bad attitude? Is it the level of urgency that they bring to doing something? Are they not doing it quick enough or intensely enough? Or is it something else entirely? Because those two things are entirely different. If it's a skill issue, you can train them on how to do something that they don't know how to do or improve the way that they're already doing something. If it's an affect issue, you have to start asking questions more about what might be influencing this person's demeanor, their approach to a particular problem from a behavioral standpoint. So really being clear about which of these is it, or is it a blend of those issues, is really critical. After you've addressed whether it's a skill or an affect issue, the next thing you might want to ask yourself is this an issue I don't like? Or is it truly a performance issue that's affecting clients or the culture of the firm? So a lot of managers that I've worked with will have this issue where they feel like their way of doing things is the only way to do it. And everybody should do it this way because this is how I did it. And that's a flawed model. We don't hire people so that we can tell them exactly what to do. We're hiring people to augment and leverage our time and the reach of our firm. So Steve Jobs is famous for a lot of things, but he's famous for this quote that says, it doesn't make sense to hire smart people and then tell them what to do. We hire smart people so they can tell us what to do. And I think that that's something that managers should remind themselves of when they're thinking about the development of an employee. Now, that's not to say that there aren't times where you want the employee to do something very specific and you want them to do it in a particular way, but we should be asking ourselves that question: is our issue with this person because they're doing it differently than we would do it, or is it truly because the performance is having an impact either on the outcomes of the firm or the culture of the firm? Another question that we should be asking ourselves, once we've sort of established, is this a skill or affect, or is this a I don't like it issue, or is it a development or a performance issue, is how does it impact the performance of the firm? So this can be client-facing performance or it can be culture, but that's very, very important. And being very clear about how it actually impacts clients or culture becomes really critical. Does it impact the performance of the employee? So connecting this to the job description and the duties of the employee will help when communicating the expectations and the development to the employee in the next step, where we actually have the conversation with the employee. Another question to be asking yourself is the employee aware of the deficit? Has the organization provided ongoing feedback about the performance? Is this going to be a surprise to the employee? How have you seen the employee respond to feedback in the past? Examining it through this lens and asking yourself this question will really help in framing the discussion with the employee. And then the last thing that I think is valuable for managers to think about before engaging in the conversation with the employee is this a development opportunity for a high-performing employee to build on strengths that they have, maybe for another role or an expansion of their responsibilities? Or is this truly like a remedial type of behavior or performance issue? And development should always be about the assumption that this person can improve. Otherwise, you're kind of wasting your time. If you don't really believe that the employee can improve and you don't think that it's worth investing time, energy, and effort in improving them, then that doesn't matter. So really approaching all of these development conversations with that mindset that the person has value, they can improve, we want to provide resources and energy to help them improve, that's going to be really critical for priming yourself for those conversations when you're going to be having them. So that's step one. It's being clear about what you're trying to impact. Now, your job as a manager is going to be setting the expectations, being clear with your employees about what kind of development that you want to see. So one of the questions that might come up first is, do I talk about this right now? Or do I wait for another period at the end of the year? And that really is a matter of how urgent this is. If this is a stretch assignment, if you're looking to develop an employee for something bigger than what they're doing today, or if this is not something that needs to be addressed immediately, you might wait till a more formal check-in, whether it's a quarterly one or a semi-annual one or the year-end review, where you can reveal, hey, here are the things that we really feel would be beneficial for you and for the organization to work on for the next 3 to 6 months. If it's a more acute issue, like this is having a direct and immediate impact on the performance of the employee or the performance of the firm, then a more immediate conversation would be much more effective. So either way, whether you're doing this today or you're going to be doing it at some predetermined time in the future, what you'll need to communicate is what needs to happen and why it needs to happen. So having clear, actionable examples. It's not good enough to say that you need to be better at being a leader. You need to be better at customer service. It has to be how you need to be better, why you need to be better, and what the outcomes will be. So tying the knots between your behavior in this area and the outcomes that we expect to see for a client, that's going to be really, really critical. And we'll talk a little bit more about specificity in a little bit. So not just providing verbal direction, but also giving people standard operating procedures is a way to make this much more actionable and much more clear to employees. So an example of this is online learning or standardization of practices at your firm. If you're familiar with the story of Sully Sullenberger, who was flying the plane out of New York City, out of LaGuardia, that was hit by a flock of birds and knocked out both engines. There was a whole movie with Tom Hanks that was made about it. And Sully goes through this process of landing this plane in the Hudson River. Fun fact is that I actually saw that happen. I was living and working in New York City, and we saw the plane in the river, saw the whole rescue. It was kind of amazing. But the point is not about me seeing it. The point is that it's well documented that what Sully did in that environment was he reached down or asked his co-pilot in this case to pull out the manual for that plane. So having a set of predetermined actions and outcomes depending on the situation is really valuable. And in the case of Sully, they went through this book, and it was only after that that he had to improvise. He had to come up with, okay, I have all this knowledge, now what do I do? But in most cases, having a step-by-step manual can be really, really valuable. So thinking about ways that you can standardize your practices, how you do things, whether it's recording the way that things are done, or providing an actual paper manual on how things are done. Those are really valuable ways to be clear with your employee about what they need to do differently. And that can feel, for a small organization especially, that has unique ways of doing things, that can feel very overwhelming. So what I would suggest that you do is, if that's one of the ways that you want to provide your employees development, whether it's an existing employee or you want to think about the future with new employees coming on board, you want to start with the repeatable and scalable things that you do, and then use technology to help the organization become a learning organization. So whether you use AI or YouTube or recordings of how to do things for your client relationship management system, or how to send and format emails, whatever it is that your organization is doing over and over that can be standardized, that would be fantastic. Once you've determined what the actual behaviors or outcomes are going to be, it's important to start to think about how is it going to be measured. So the classic measurement protocol or toolkit is this idea of SMART goals. So that's, if you've never heard of SMART goals, we've got some resources that are available to you around that. But for the sake of time here, SMART goals are things that are specific. They can be very clearly identified. They are measurable. We know when it's happening and when it's not happening. They should be achievable, meaning that they shouldn't be so far out of scope that somebody could never achieve it. You would never want to give me a SMART goal of running a 3-minute mile. It's just not going to happen at my age and with my joint issues that I've got. It should be relevant, so it should be connected to either a desirable cultural thing that's happening at your firm, or a behavioral thing that you want, or it should be connected to client outcomes or firm outcomes. And it should be time bound. And as it relates to time bound, the research shows that goal setting that is measured over the course of 12 weeks is more effective than measuring it for a shorter period of time, because it's not as achievable, and it's more effective than measuring it over a much longer period of time, because it can get diluted over that period of time. It gets thinned out. So there's a reason why people have annual quarterly reviews, or quarterly reviews, I guess is a better way of saying that. Because it's that 12-week period where people can say, for the next 3 months, this is what I'm going to be working on, and making sure that people are focused on that thing for that period of time. And then the last bit about this is, how will you keep accountability? So what will you do as a manager to monitor the progress or the change in the employee? So communicating that to the employee, having some agreement around that. But what are you going to be doing? How are you going to use technology to check in with the performance of the employee? And we'll talk later about marshaling resources, but thinking about how are you going to monitor this behavior? Are you going to be observing the behavior in meetings? Are you going to have some sort of dashboard or toolkit to observe the behavior? Are you going to be checking in with the employee and seeing how they're feeling about what they're doing? Those are all different ways that you are going to help hold accountability, and communicating that with other people is going to be valuable for a variety of reasons. Now, the last bit about this is, people often say, well, how often should I check in on this? And development is not a one-time deal. Setting development goals setting objectives. That's not something that you do once a year and then check in 12 months later. Best practices would say that this should be a topic of conversation with your employee on a regular basis, whether it's every meeting that you have with them, if you have regular weekly one-on-ones, or if you're meeting with them once a month. That's up to you, but it really should very likely be something that you check in with them on a regular and ongoing basis. So we've gone through the first two steps, and that includes identifying what kind of change needs to happen, and then the second part is communicating with your employee about what exactly you want them to do differently. Now it's time to talk about actually applying the resources that you have at your firm to achieve the outcomes that you're looking at. So one of these first questions that come up is, how much is this going to cost? Right? When we think about resources, people often think in dollars and cents, and I think that's important. You want to think about dollars and cents, but you also want to be thinking about, is this a time issue? Is it an energy issue? And how much of that is available for us? So let's talk about the dollars and cents part of it. When it comes to training, typically on building skill or having people go to courses or bringing an outside expert in, that's relatively less expensive than the other part of the equation. So let's talk about the less expensive part. It may still be a significant outlay of cash, but what you're doing is you're paying for the development of a particular skill. So you can have people take a Khan Academy or Udemy course on Excel coding. You can have them go to a classroom environment or bring in the expert to come and do the training and development. But that's only really one part of the development equation. The other part of it is, how do you sustain that learning, provide the on-the-job opportunities to deliver what they've learned to the organization, to practice the skill? How are you budgeting your time as a manager to evaluate the performance of the employee, to guide them if you're approaching this from a mentoring or a coaching point of view? These are all different spokes of the wheel, so to speak, and training being only one part of it. It's very often what I've found is what organizations only look at. And I think it's important to recognize that it is a standalone intervention for employee development. It typically does not work without the other pieces of the puzzle. So what are those other pieces? Well, two of the main pieces that we see most frequently are things like mentoring and coaching. So mentoring, people use these sometimes interchangeably. I just want to define very quickly how I see them differently. Mentoring is typically less directive on the specifics of performance and goals, and can be typically longer term than coaching. Coaching is more goal oriented and focused more on the measurement of improved outcomes. So you can use mentoring, but it's less effective for or useful for more acute and specific performance deficits. It's more useful for higher performing employees who can benefit from somebody who might have more job or life experience than they do. So you can think about this as somebody with mentoring would go to their mentor and say, I'm experiencing this challenge organizationally, or I'm finding it difficult to create work-life balance, or I want to find ways to better communicate with my manager. And the mentor might be able to provide them with their own experiences or their own history in doing that, and maybe some suggestions. Mentors may or may not have training in how to be a coach or how to be a trainer. So to speak. So those specific skill development pieces, mentoring is a good tool to have, but it shouldn't necessarily be the only tool. When it comes to coaching, it's very helpful for both high-performing and underperforming employees, and typically is more useful when there's a specific outcome or goal in mind that is understood by both parties. So that's another resource that you might be thinking about using in the development of the employee. And then maybe the most important resource is the regular and repeated contact that the employee has with the manager or other people that they interact with, giving them feedback and guidance and light touches on the wheel, so to speak, around how well they're doing something or where they need to step it up in other areas. So those are some of the resource pieces that you might want to think about as a manager of others. And then the final piece of all of this is accountability, and where appropriate, maybe consequences, but accountability is really what we're talking about here. So the first step in providing accountability is that feedback that you give on a regular basis. So it's got to be something that occurs not just once a year, not just once a month, but in your interactions with your employees. It can be very helpful to say, I know that these are the 3 things that you're working on. How's that going? Give me some examples of where this is working for you or where you're still struggling. Asking those types of questions in your regular interactions with your employees, and maybe even having sort of a prompt or reminder for yourself that when you do have regular one-on-ones or check-ins with your employees, that you've got those questions in your back pocket. Get in the habit of asking them those things so it's top of mind. It's reminding them, here's what we're paying attention to, here's where your focus should be, here's what we're looking for in terms of improvement. Where you can, in terms of providing feedback, catch them doing it right. One of the key things in providing employees with developmental goals or objectives is helping them see their progress along the way. So wherever they're doing something right, make sure that you call them out on that. It's way more impactful than calling them out on where they're not doing it right. That's not to say that you can't tell them, hey, you could have done this piece better, but especially where they're doing things well, catch them doing it right. Celebrate those wins. Let them know that they're on the right path. Connect the dots. Hey, when you do this thing, when you show up in the meeting and you ask these questions, or you show up in the meeting and you are taking notes, what it shows to the other party is that you care. And that's one of the measures that we're looking for in terms of your development plan. Hey, when you turn around work in 24 hours, that's a really great improvement in where you've been in the past. Or if you've been unable to turn around that work in 24 hours, when you check in with the other party and let them know, hey, I'm working on this, it's going to take me a little bit more time. Those are great indicators of where the employee is doing things right, and you can show them how it connects to the overall objectives and goals that you have for them. Another step in accountability is measuring progress. Some things are going to be more quantifiable. So like I just mentioned, something like the speed of turnaround on something, or if somebody's able to type a certain number of words per minute, whether they've increased accuracy and reduced errors by a particular measure. Those are all really, great ways for you to show the employee, hey, you're making progress from point A to point B. Keep up the great work. Some are more qualitative. So a classic example of this that I've seen in organizations is somebody tells a person, you need to be a better leader. You need to show more leadership. And while that may be an admirable thing for somebody to do, it's very difficult to measure my progress in being a leader if you're not specific about what that looks like. So is being a leader wearing a suit and tie every day? Is it shaving every day? Is it not wearing a red shirt? Is it walking with less tripping? I don't know what that is. So being more clear, like demonstrating active listening by paraphrasing or reflecting, or delegating lower complexity work to subordinates. Those are very specific and can be measured. And they may relate back to what you mean by leadership. So being specific, it goes all the way back to the first step, which is identifying what are you trying to impact? Is this an affect or a skill issue? Is it a soft skill or is it a hard skill? Those are really important. Another way that you can measure more qualitative things is by taking pre and post training or intervention measurements. So measure the performance today by a certain set of criteria, and then measure it after the person has gotten training or direct feedback or coaching or mentoring on the thing, so that you can say, well, this is how we measured it before and this is how we measured it at the end, and we've seen this amount of improvement. Net promoter scores, if you're not familiar with that, it's a 10-point scale, and asking people on a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate the performance or the ability of this person to do this job? And that's another way to measure more qualitative elements. Using things like 360 feedback, measure it against the person's own perception and then the perception of other people. Those are all ways to get that pre and post measurement over time and address these qualitative performance issues with less quantifiable objectives. And then the last bit is providing support, not just from the training and the mentoring and the coaching perspective, but where it's appropriate, making other people in the organization aware of this employee's objectives and their goals so that you can be on the lookout for it. So if I know to pay attention to somebody taking notes or turning around work in a quicker period of time, or using reflective questions or using open-ended questions rather than closed-ended questions, whatever your performance measurement is, if I tell other people, hey, be on the lookout for this, they'll be more attuned to seeing it. It's kind of like the thing about saying, don't think of a white elephant. Now everybody that's watching this video is thinking of a white elephant. It's the same thing with performance objectives. If you tell other people in the organization, hey, Mike is going to be focused on being more concise, being more clear, the other people will be looking out for that. And maybe supporting the employee in helping them do those things. So marshaling those resources and support by making other people aware of those. Have the employee do it. Have the employee go to their colleagues or their other individuals and be able to say, hey, this is what I'm working on. Can you catch me doing it right? Or when I'm not doing it right, would you remind me that this is something that I should be working on? And those are great ways to hold people accountable, help them stay the path, help them stay engaged in what it is that they're doing. Okay, so in summary, when it comes to developing employees, it's not a one-time thing. It's a blend of modalities. It's not just training or feedback. It's got to be a blend of those things. And it really hinges on planning and clarity of outcomes. So the more that you can be very specific and clear about what you want the employee to do, how you're going to measure it, what the outcomes will look like, that's going to really drive that employee's engagement and buy into those things. I hope that you found this valuable, and I wish you the best of luck on providing development guidance for your employees.